Hi, Meera. Welcome to Ventures Grace. We are live.
I love it. Thank you for having me.
To start the show, beyond your amazing fashion outfit, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. You started your career at Morgan Stanley and you have worked at Obvious Ventures before joining Redpoint. Why don't we start with what were some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career, kind of shape you into who you are today?
Yeah. Core lessons. I think there's a few things. I think first and foremost is, the old adage of you are the five people you spend the most time with. And I think the importance of teams and surrounding yourself with people, both whose values you align with and want to emulate, but also people that you'll learn from. And learning from comes down to their level of intensity and drive. Does it match yours? Does their level of curiosity equal yours or surpass yours? And do they know a lot of things that you don't know? And so I think that's something I've thought a lot about in terms of the seats I've chosen to take along the way. Another thing that I think, and that for me, I learned, the first day I landed on the trading floor as an intern, and has really been reinforced with every other decision I've made. On the flip side, I think another really valuable lesson for me from the trading floor was this idea of asking for the order. I think every job at the end of the day, or any job as you move on, ends up being a sales job. I think venture is very much a sales job. We, are both sales and customer success. And I think the best account managers very much marry those two, but it's how are you doing this both in a way that leaves an impact and serves someone in the way they want to be served, but also at the end, ask for the order, or ask if they can invest or what have you. So for me, that would very much be number three. Number two. And I feel like I had a third, and it'll maybe come back to me in the middle of this conversation. And if it does, I'll interrupt you and we can go down that rabbit hole too.
I love that. I really love what you said about basically in the end, everything is sales job and then you really have to ask in the end. And I wonder, maybe we could start with I guess from your current, since everybody's talking about the current AI era, why don't we start with what are something that you feel it's a very interesting trend, and since we're in evolution, what are things that you feel are actually being adopted?
Yeah. So I think that, so much of early AI hoopla was obviously all around the models. And then we entered the phase of everyone being excited about vertical AI and the potential of agents. But that really begs the question that I think we're beginning to answer now of what does that actually mean? And as I think about what that actually means, it really comes down to the idea of orchestration. And I think in many instances, investing in orchestration actually beats a lot of these super capital intensive model wars. As you think about orchestration as an opportunity, and then I'll kind of double click into how what that then looks like. The benefit of orchestration is that you are benefiting from all of these model improvements over time. And even looking at what ChatGPT gave you 12 months ago versus what it's giving you today, regardless of how you feel about GPT-5, it's night and day better. And I think you're seeing this even more so when it comes to a lot of image models, video models that are, unpacking complex drawings or what have you. And so it's if you exist as an orchestration application, you sort of benefit from this rising tide, lift all boats opportunity. Then as you sort of think about what orchestration looks like or how you then make money off of that with an application, I think there's actually, what we're seeing is there's two pretty different camps. I think, or we were just talking about this co-pilot, and every industry deserves a co-pilot. And every industry actually doesn't want a co-pilot, nor do they know how to use it. And I think we're seeing this more and more in industries that have always outsourced to BPOs and really just want you to take care of the job, and they want to pay you for it. And then they want you to hand them back the completed work that is, trust, that they trust, is verified, what have you. And so I think we're seeing more of this selling software opportunity, where I really think of this as orchestration as a service. And obviously today, a lot of these companies, we made an investment that we haven't announced yet in the legal ecosystem that has paralegals in the loop, right? And it's, I'm going to hand you back perfect workflow where my competitors have a bunch of errors because they just have software automating all of this. We will, guarantee our work by handing this right back to you. And customers love it because instead of still needing the paralegal who then needs to learn new software, who then needs to go through and check and make sure everything's okay. It's just landing right back in their case management system. You ship it off and it works. Similarly, we're seeing this a lot, I would say, both across healthcare and financial services, two massive markets where, again, whether it is handling referrals, handling scheduling, handling like loan processing or KYC, it's this whole idea of like you are actually fully replacing a human contractor or consultant that I previously used because you have a human that is providing human quality work. And so I think this whole orchestration as a service opportunity is actually quite interesting, which is not just roll-ups, by the way, right? Like a lot of these firms have gotten really excited about roll-ups, which is great depending on your capital allocation strategy. But I actually think orchestration as a service can look much more like a SaaS business in terms of the margin profile over time, because you're maybe at 50, 60% gross margin today, but over time that looks like 80, and it's probably never going to be 95. And I think that still works. On the other end of the spectrum, I think we're also increasingly seeing the rise of, let's call them like orchestration operating systems. And I really think about this as empowering the expert. In a lot of these fields, let's take design or marketing or like scientific research, having a 90% complete solution that I've just handed to you or like a good enough solution is not a thing. It's like they want really, fine-tune like precision when it comes to their ability to customize or configure. And so they actually do want, more of a co-pilot, but not a chatbot. They want the tools that they are used to having. If it's a designer, it is, let me actually be able to change the gradation here or the sizing here, kind of in a way that looks similar to what I've seen. And I want to understand every step that's being taken along the way. Similarly, with scientific research, I don't want you to just tell me this drug's going to work. I need to see the steps. And so I think whether it's through some of these like node-based workflows that we're seeing more of, or just, I would say systems that show more of like the sequential steps that are taken, we're seeing in more expert-led industries, systems kind of arise with a little bit more of that profile. And so to me, that's really exciting and really interesting, right? Because you have two very different camps, both which are seeing strong adoption and success, but it ultimately comes down to like, who is the end user? What do they want and what are they used to? And I think people are realizing that unlike a lot of the horizontal SaaS in the past, where we thought, hey, all these, users are kind of similar, like in vertical SaaS, market by market is wildly different. And so it's like, how can you actually provide a tool that speaks the language of this market or speaks to the needs of this market?
Wow, I love that. I have so many questions there. Like, by the way, quick shout out to Gaurav, who is like fanboying you. So I love them. I love him. He's awesome. Okay, so maybe we could start with like the orchestration operating system. Like, can you give us an example of, obviously like it kind of like how it's kind of like a co-pilot, but it's kind of like, so like I think one thing you mentioned for the first half was like, people don't want like a co-pilot. People want someone to like get the stuff done, like human-like experience. Like, I pay you X project rate and then like I get the stuff done. I see like that kind of becoming the new way of like how AI agents started charging people as well. So like instead it's like an outcome based instead of like seat based things. So I wonder maybe we could start with like if there's any particular sub industry or like any vertical that you feel like it's like very suitable for this kind of job, and like what are some interesting company that you are seeing in the space
suitable for like an orchestration operating system?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think, in a different way, you can even look at something like a cursor, right? And kind of think about that as enabling you still with a high degree of precision to manage your code. I think if you look at, I'm not going to call it non-AI, but both pre-AI and post-AI, like we've seen infinite examples in design and marketing. And I think the best example, given the kind of the month that we're in, or maybe it was last month, is looking at Figma, right? And kind of understanding the amount of configurability that it gave to, or it continues to give rather, to designers. Like that is what you want and need for a professional to be able to use this. There's a reason that professional designers use Figma over kind of other products on the market or over ChatGPT or whatever it is. As you think about, like other industries, I think within design, you're seeing this extend not just to product design, which is obviously where Figma is and is the element of design that is maybe most top of mind to, folks like us that are in and around tech most of our time. But you look beyond that, whether it's, ad creation, video design, like post-production in general. You think about a fashion website and needing to pop up different, elements of a model on a product page. Like, design touches almost everything that we do. Like, anything you see on a screen is design. And some of that is actually, software design, if you will, but a lot of it extends beyond that. And I think with AI reducing the cost to produce some of this stuff, let's take video, for example, we're going to see a proliferation of, these forms of like media rich content. And I think the reason people will be able to do that is because of a lot of these kind of orchestration operating systems, whether it's post-production focused or, marketing focused or whatever else.
I love that. I wonder when it comes to like thinking about like profit margin, and the other part you mentioned was, correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned like, registration as a service. I think the margin was like 60% to 80%. Can you maybe give us like an example of like how would people like kind of increase profit margin later on after, they adopt a certain type of users?
Yeah. I mean, I think the way a lot of these companies are scaling, which I think is prudent, is I'm going to start out with a couple customers. And when I start out with a couple customers, I'm basically just doing the service, but I'm using, let's call them a super biller, if we're talking about healthcare billing as an example, right? And the super biller is more efficient than the person in your office. So maybe they do it slightly more efficient. They do it slightly more efficiently. So my margin's a little bit better, but it's probably, a 10% margin, 20% margin, because I still have to pay the person. Mm-hmm. Then I begin to watch them. And as you kind of train on these experts, the super biller, the super paralegal, the super admin, and the super loan processor, or what have you, you then begin to build AI models that mimic their behavior or train on their behavior. And I think the value of having that human in the loop is that you're not just reading the internet saying, how should this be done? You're actually watching like a best in class operator kind of go through the workflow, and then you begin automating various steps of their workflow. Let's say they have 10 steps, and you basically go one by one. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And until you hit 100%, you have humans that are still doing that. Over time, we will get closer and closer to that 100. There will always probably, maybe not, but like more than likely until, AGI is here, there, and everywhere, be edge cases. And so there will be a human that is verifying it. But instead of a task taking 10 hours, today this person's probably spending 2 hours, which is way better than 10. Over time, that should be 10 minutes. And so that's how I think you really drive the margin improvements, is allowing humans to, let's say cover not 100K of revenue or 200K of revenue, but one human can service $1 million of revenue or $2 million of revenue. There's always going to be model costs. You're always going to have, underlying infrastructure, but it's how can you kind of create even more leverage with the humans behind the scenes.
For sure. I wonder when it comes to like thinking about different, I guess, like vertical AI or like in the SaaS space in general, since you have invested in like multiple different category of things, for example, Trunk 2, which is like a AI powered software for like construction industry. So like, since like you primarily invested in Series A, maybe we could talk about like, what makes a startup successfully actually raise an A, since the dropout rate is like higher than usual. And the other thing is like about like building these like industry specific moat. Like I feel like the traditional industry is like having a moment right now. Everybody's like investing in like how to kind of like re-innovate the traditional industry. That's kind of like a deep tech is like a trend now. So how do you identify who is like the winner in, say, construction or any subcategory of things that you have been like looking at?
Yeah, I think there's a question of like, how does a company raise a Series A, and then what gets us at Redpoint excited to invest in a Series A, and there's definitely Venn diagram overlap, but it's definitely not one-to-one. So maybe I'll speak from the Redpoint point of view. And I think it's the exact same, unsurprisingly, it's our opinion with what determines this person's, like, why the company ultimately wins. And it's really simple. It like 100% comes down to the team. I think as early stage investors, whether that's at seed or Series A, and in instances, these Series Bs look a lot like early stage companies. But it really comes down to the founders. As we sort of think about, founders, I think in this market, velocity has never been more important. It used to be you get to $1 million in ARR, and that was so hard that if you did it, it was going to take anyone else a really long time to get there. Now competitors spring up overnight, and so it's a question of like, hey, can you build a head start? Or even if you're coming from behind, we just ensure that your speed is that much faster that like once you break out, no one's going to be able to catch you. And so we think a lot about the velocity, the intensity of the founder, as well as like the technical talent around the table. In many instances, that is, a killer co-founder and CTO. Trunk Tools is unique in that Sarah is a solo founder and has a PhD in, data science, but is not, in the code base by any stretch. And so but she has that velocity. She learns so quickly when it comes to the market insights. And so like that is huge for her. The other element of it is like go-to-market rigor and like why does this team win from a go-to-market perspective? Because I think in not all, but in many of these industries, let's take healthcare, for example, the product roadmaps really all look the same. And like, it does not, at some point they will differentiate and they might have some unique insights, but for the most part, like it does not require some like groundbreaking brilliance to know, hey, here are the 12 jobs that are done within, a primary care clinic, and all of these can be automated. So let's go one by one. What matters is, can this founder kind of suck all the oxygen out of the industry or out of the room, because they're on stage at every conference, they're at the tip of the tongue of every single doctor. They just like build these brands. I think, you look at, let's take like Harvey and, a different area of law. They did that really well early on. And you've seen this happen, like a bridge within healthcare, I think did this phenomenally well early on as well. But it's like, why will they win commercially? And that typically happens for two reasons. One is you are an industry insider with just like so much credibility and such a strong network. And Sarah from Trunk Tools, she's been in the construction industry for almost 20 years when she started this company, because she started so young, kind of in the field. But it was like no other founder with her tech prowess like had as much industry experience as Sarah. And like you feel that on stage at these conferences, you feel that in the field, like everyone has heard of Trunk Tools, and that is really powerful when like the brand is so much bigger than like even the company is as a Series A company. And so we think a lot about that industry side. And then I do think there is also, which can't be discounted, just this like commercial aura of other founders. Like you can be wildly successful. Yeah, vibes.
Word.
You can be wildly successful and not come from the industry. I will say one of my companies that we've not announced yet, so I will not spoil it. I was at a customer happy hour for them a month or so ago, and all their customers who were characters were talking to me and comparing them to the competitors. And they're like, oh yeah, I don't like that guy, or like that guy's really weird. And like, these are normal humans, and normal humans are judgy. And, they are judging on vibes. And the founder of this company that we invested in, they just adore. They think he is the coolest and the best and the nicest. And like, they just want him to win. And so it's the thing, it's like this almost intangible element of like, is this someone that the industry wants to win? And like, a lot of what we are trying to understand is like, us being, in some instances a little judgy ourselves with like, is this someone we think the world will adore? Because in these industries, that does matter.
Oh my God. Even I'm so surprised. Even I would imagine if for let's say construction industry or any other industry would prefer things that are quote unquote actually working, or there is more sophisticated data behind it. I guess how do you kind of is there any industry benchmark or any metrics that you will lean towards these vertical AI companies? Since I feel nowadays, as you mentioned, velocity is everything. People are building hitting a certain threshold really, really quick. Let's say if you're building any kind of SaaS tool. Like let's say you have like, $8 million like I don't know,
Yeah.
ARR, like what does that even mean? Like since like there is like, the 1% company that are getting like, $7 million versus there's like, a 50 people company getting like $7 million. It's probably very different, right? So how do you think about like I guess like the revenue threshold or the people threshold or like the people to revenue ratio threshold? Like what would be like an effective benchmark to evaluate like Series A companies?
Yeah, I would say we are less benchmark driven maybe than some other firms, in part because even though we are very metrics focused, but I think it's so industry specific. I think some of the biggest businesses will be built in the hardest markets to crack, and like that's what creates the defensibility. I think if you look at marketing, the number of companies we've seen go 0 to 5 in under 12 months, like I could name 10, does not mean they're defensible. And it's a category like we as a firm actually haven't invested in kind of this AI wave. Not to say that we won't, but and so I don't think we're saying, your 5 million of ARR in marketing is better than the $4 million of ARR in accounting software, which is going to be really painful to build because of all the complexities of the industry. We're not looking at it that way. I think what we care most about, one is just like general velocity. Like, are you seeing that every quarter it's growing faster and faster? Like, are you seeing a flywheel begin to build? And then where I probably focus most is actually on retention and engagement. We were spending time with a company recently, and their median usage per day was over an hour, and the average number of sessions was over 3. And so I'm like, if your median user is spending over 3 hours a day in your platform, that's wild. That means you own their workflow. And so in a lot of these industries, I think people are coming from different angles with I do this marketing thing for you, and someone else does that advertising thing for you, or this or that. And as these like converge over time, it really comes down to who owns the workflow. I think historically we've like talked about this oftentimes as a system of record. I think in today's world, the system of record maybe matters a little bit less because it's behind the scenes. It's really like, okay, with the data in that system, like what are you then doing with it? And sometimes we talk about it as this system of action. But yeah, it's really like, where is your home? Like, what is the home screen? It's the same reason people care so much about the browser when it comes to consumers, right? And so I'm really looking for signals that like you are becoming this person's home screen, whether it is the first thing they open when they turn on the lights in the dentist office in the morning, or when they're in the field and put on their boots and open up their phone. Like, what are they using? And so a lot of those are the metrics that like I'm actually most focused on.
I love that. But I feel like it's kind of like also hard to like, maybe it's easy to do the diligence, but I guess like, can you walk us through like, how would you diligence if like what they said about like, oh, okay, we're using this thing like 3 hour day. It's like true. It's like how many user testing or like not testing, but like it's like diligence call that you have to make to like verify certain situation about, how well, like, because I think like if it's like Figma, like, you and I maybe like just we're vibe coding something and then we're like using it ourselves. But like for the construction tool or like, the lawyer, doctor, like dentist, like I feel like those are the industry I'm like, okay, so are you actually using that much? But if they give you like a client base, like you call the first 3 people, everybody will say hopefully amazing things about people, right? So like how do you kind of like diligence the stickiness to like verify if it's like actually true?
Yeah. I mean, some of it's in the data that the company's providing, and some of it's in, customer reference calls that they provided or back channel we've done. We also try to talk to a lot of folks in the industry though, who might not actually be a customer, to understand like their workflow, their desires. Oftentimes you're telling them like, what if I could do this for you? How would you feel, or how would you react? And I think one of the beautiful things about, chatting with folks kind of across, let's call them Main Street industries, is they're very direct in their feedback. Like they let you know, entirely unfiltered, oh my gosh, like I would fall on the floor, that would be amazing. Or like, no way, that person's taking my job, blah, blah, blah. And so I think, and the processes or the the way I like to invest is both getting to know the company over time, but really getting to know the industry over time. It's not us coming to a 72-hour decision on whether or not we want to invest. It's I've been thinking about this for a really long time, and I actually have opinions, which you might agree with, or you might disprove. Like, I'm not saying, we're always right. But I think coming in with like a really prepared mind or like frame of context is really helpful in kind of validating whether or not, this actually could take over the workflow.
I think that's like super interesting. And I do feel like because of like, even if people today is not a user, but like when you put it that way as like, maybe certain workflow would be differ, or like basically if someone's doing XYZ for you, would you use it? I think those are like really great questions to ask. And maybe we could talk about, I guess, like what are some like subsector or like any vertical AI, any vertical as a group that you feel like have the most potential to generate like the next $1 billion companies. Obviously construction is one for you since you have invested in it, but like what are some other subsector that you're currently looking very closely?
Yeah. I mean, if you just look at sheer dollars of, I'm going to call it administrative spend, but like, I think it encompasses even more than things we generally categorize as administrative. Healthcare, like hands down, I think there's so much, there's not only so much opportunity there in terms of the size of the market, the percentage of it that is predictable, highly repeatable, mundane tasks, like those are right for AI disruption. I think the other beautiful thing about healthcare is that there's a ton of industry pull. I think in some of these industries you go in and people are skeptical and they're like, okay, well, is this thing going to take my job? Or like, is this actually going to help me? My dad owned his own practice growing up. And so we have a bunch of kind of family friends who are clinicians across the Southeast. And, I send the text to all these uncles, if you will, like, hey, haven't talked to you in 10 years. Like, I have a company that does XYZ thing. Do you want to chat with them? And I get almost universal yeses. It's like quite shocking because they are so bought in on the fact that their margins have gone down every single year because of the regulatory or malpractice overhead that has kind of come into the healthcare system. I think particularly for doctors in that, 45 plus range, 50 plus range, like they remember the good old days where like they were going to make a bank and like everywhere. Yeah, like it gets worse. And so I think AI has the potential to like re-expand their margin and give them back time in a way that like they've never seen before. And so that's what I like about healthcare. It's not only one of those sectors where 20 years from now, we can say AI is going to be making a big impact. It's one of those sectors where like today, these business owners are saying, please, please, please give me, which I think, again, creates like a ton of opportunities for, like massive companies to be built now, which is awesome.
For sure. I wonder if, let's say like healthcare as a sector is like where a lot of like these like older system is going to be like going to be replaced by the newer system. I guess like maybe if you could give us like a overview on like how does the money flow in the industry in your opinion, and then also like what are some, I guess, like sub segment that you feel like would be changed by AI versus not, just because I think like a bridge obviously is like a very successful one, like the transcription, like everyone needs one, but like I heard like they were very successful because of they are doing, maybe I would like we had a bridge investors on our show before, so like I think I could remember completely wrong, but I think they were doing something with Epic Systems, so like which is like why they're very successful today. How do you work with like an existing system that was kind of like the legacy player that's like in the industry, and how do you think about like the AI company like go to market strategy, since like I feel like the mind share is interesting to win, like because obviously I feel like the B2B SaaS companies like these days, like whenever I look at the YC company like page, like there's every day there's a new video, all the videos are like Netflix quality and I feel like marketing is like definitely on top of everybody's mind, like you said, like business aura or whatever that is. So like I feel like that's such a good point, but on the other hand, like how does one actually win the distribution? Because sure, you could have like a very great marketing play, but like, will people actually buy the thing is like another like question. So maybe to sum up, like one is like how does the industry, how does the money flow in the industry, and then second of all is like where is like the subsector that you felt like is going to generate most amount of money, and then number three is like how do you build the distribution in like a very specific domain.
Yeah. So maybe taking a step back, healthcare is like the biggest thing on earth and means so many different things, right? Like some of them are big industries, but I think will be disrupted by AI in very different ways. Take pharma or payers or like, you know, medical devices. We'll set them aside because I think like they are very different buyers, have very different needs, have different adoption appetite, candidly, or maybe have a different propensity to like build in-house because of the size of those organizations. So let's instead come back to providers of care. And providers of care kind of sit in two pockets. There are like hospitals and health systems, and then there are kind of like independent practices. What's nice about these like care providers is they don't have massive, you know, tech teams or what have you. Like sometimes they will attempt to build in-house, or they'll hire a third party to build something bespoke for them. But generally they are buying off-the-shelf solutions to solve their pain points, whereas like a payer or pharma company might go the build route. So then if you were, let's taking like the care provider ecosystem, big business, and you have SMBs. And like the mid-size SMBs are actually still quite large. The big businesses can lead to massive contracts, but they're a lot slower on the sales side in terms of the sales cycle. And they have many, many counterparties involved in those buying decisions, which can be the death of a startup. And so I would say where I am most excited is actually in this bucket of kind of like independent, you know, specialty practices, let's say, or like independent clinics broadly. The reason they're exciting is for a couple of reasons. One is there are a couple decision makers that can actually come to a really quick decision. Two, these business owners typically have a very like ROI oriented mindset. And so what they care about is like, how does this impact your top line and or bottom line? And so if you jump and three, because of some of like
both is this Meera's end or is this my end? Can you guys hear us?
I seem to have internet.
It's me.
But it could be me.
Oh no.
Can you see me? Maybe. Maybe. Now I'm alone. I'll wait a minute for you to come back, Chris. If anyone else has questions or comments, you can leave other comments like Cora and or ask questions that I'm happy to address. She's back.
Oh, I am so sorry. I am pretty sure
totally fine.
Connected to my phone. Okay, so I'm so sorry. Okay, so the last time I hear about the conversation is like when you start explaining about the healthcare ecosystem was like very complicated thing.
Yeah.
So people buying off people. I mean, I was like taking notes like literally by typing. So it's like people are buying off shelf solutions.
Yeah. Oh, and I guess where I was going with that is if you also think about these, you know, folks buying off the shelf solutions, and you look at, you know, the smaller end of that, what is also helpful from a startup perspective is you're seeing a lot of private equity activity. And these private equity buyers are not only rolling up, you know, derm practices or, you know, orthopedics clinics or what have you. And so you then have one buyer to access 20 SMBs. That buyer is also incredibly financially motivated. And so again, coming back to kind of the whole idea of ROI for them, if you can promise them, you know, cost savings, they're bought in. And so as you think of like the time to a yes or like the excitement of the yes, healthcare is one of those industries where you can get to a very easy yes, which I think is quite valuable. Then to your question on like, how do you win? These buyers are thoughtful, but also conservative. And what I mean by that is like, it needs to work and like, they're not someone that's just going to pay any price for what you're delivering. Like they are discriminating, but they also really look for signal from one another, or from trusted industry sources. That could be, you know, you're an optometrist, that could be Vision Source, and you go to all the Vision Source conferences and you're a member of this organization and everything they recommend you buy. That could be, you know, all of my friends who I was playing golf with who are also optometrists, they all use this solution, so I'm going to buy it too. And so I think really heavily investing and like becoming the trusted industry player, whether that's with marketing, whether that's with conferences, which tend to work like very well, in certain, you know, pockets of healthcare, whatever it is. But I think what we're seeing right now, which is another reason so many VC dollars are flying into it, like healthcare is in this land grab moment. And you look at the healthcare systems in the past that have been really successful, like once they're dominant, they're really dominant and they're really sticky because again, these buyers care, but they also have other things to do. They have patients to take care of, they have a practice to run. They don't want to reevaluate every 6 months or even every 24 months. Like once you're in, you're generally in, which again is great in terms of opportunity, but it also speaks to the like the pressing need from a time perspective.
Wow, I love this industry already. I feel like so basically you're saying like it's kind of like a group thing industry. If you break into one, you break into 40. And but like how do you break into the first one though? Like do you have to be like a, you know, a golf buddy like or like just go to an industry conference and trying to like set up a booth and then you're good, or like how is this like a, is there like a heavier act, like I guess like a heavier to entry to, is there like a moat around the getting in at the beginning? I'm sure there is.
Yeah, I think it comes back to a bit of what I said earlier is like your customers need to want you to win. Because like it is not natural for a startup to win. And so then how do you do that? Maybe you're the golf buddy, but like we've seen many companies that have been really successful or like are in the early stages of success where they were like, you know, the young starry-eyed Stanford grads who showed up on, you know, the doorstep of a clinic in Missouri who's never been paid attention to. And like, you're getting someone to take a chance on you. And so you don't just have to be their best friend. I think a lot of these doctors enjoy the idea of like mentoring younger people or what have you. But it means being really thoughtful and like over investing in that customer relationship. I think when you do, you know, customer calls with the companies that are doing well, their customers will rave about how hands-on they are, particularly like the founders with the like, they answer my call at any time and like, they're the most responsive person in my life, including my wife, or like whatever it is. And I think it's like that customer obsession and like that customer connectivity in terms of the closeness of the relationship that really, really matters.
I love that, customer obsession and customer connectivity. I wonder, so like, what are something that you feel like are not going to work in the vertical AI era? So like, is there something that like, is there any specific sector that you have actually delved deep into it and then actually feel like, oh, the more we know, like maybe, I guess like the market's like super fragmented, or maybe it is like very low margin. What are something that you find actually surprising that like, you know, since you started looking at the industry to actually find out that's like something that I will never invest?
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, our job as early stage investors is to be optimists. And so I don't know if I would necessarily say like this is a sector that will not be impacted by AI. What I will say is there's sectors where I'm like, this is going to be slower. Let's take penetrating payers, for example, on the other side of healthcare. Like they're a really slow customer. They're still in the phase where they think they can do this themselves in many instances. And so it's like acknowledging that some sectors are not going to move as quickly. So maybe I wait to make an investment there for, 6 months, 24 months, whatever it is. On the flip side, there are also sectors that I wouldn't call them uninvestable, but I would call them very challenging to invest in at the early stages, which I would define as seed and Series A. Because let's take some of these marketing plays. They all look quite similar. And like, if you really know the team, like you can make a team bet and say, this is the team that's going to win. But in terms of product, in terms of metrics, like there's not actual data we can glean from them. At Series B, Series C, like I actually think they're much better entry points in certain sectors because the breakout player becomes much more apparent. And I think you're actually better off like paying up for that level of certainty versus like trying to choose, who it is at seed or Series A when in certain sectors that's just much harder to do.
For sure. I wonder, so like when it comes to like Series B and Series C, I'm sure you chat with like the investor who invests in the later stage of the companies that you're currently looking at now. What would you say are the good, I wouldn't say metrics or benchmark, but like, I guess like what are some good, I guess metrics and benchmarks that like people will evaluate Series A company, and then how would you advise them? Like, let's say today you invest in this company, and then what would be your advice for them to be like, hey, here's your playbook to Series B? If there is any playbook, since like I feel like it changes so fast, like Series B is kind of like
so I would say like maybe the two things the three things I'd be telling my companies is you need to be growing 4x year over year for anyone to take you seriously. And so it's less the scale, it's more the growth rate. On the margin side, it's okay if they're not exceptional. People are paying up they're prioritizing growth, but you need to have a plan. And you need to be showing, sequential improvements. So like, how are your margins expanding? And then 3, which I think is slightly less important, but then number 3 is the net dollar retention. And it really is thinking about like, not only is my, customer engaged and not churning, like, are they expanding over time? Because that's often an indication both of their excitement, but also of like their trust in you. And so I think that's a metric that like I care a lot about with my companies. And I think Series B's investors really focus on as well.
For sure. I like what you said about like sequential improvement instead of like, just focusing on a profit margin. And I guess like when it comes to evaluating people that you invest into like Series A, like I guess how early do you typically meet the founder that you end up investing? Would it be like from the I guess like from like pre-seed stage, or like two guy who just quit OpenAI, to like how far do you have to like typically track the founder to actually invest in the Series A? And then like I'm sure the seed investors like are probably passing along like 4,000 deals to you, and like how do you kind of like quickly filter out the stuff that are like not that important, though there might be like maybe prominent seed investor who are on the cap table, but like is that typically like the most like famous seed investor typically send the best deals, or like you feel like the maybe emerging managers or like people in like subdomain expertise sending in the more interesting deals in terms of investing in Series A?
Yeah. So when it comes to meeting founders, I mean, as early as possible is the answer. If I look at the last deal I did, I had known the founder for probably 6 years before I invested, and had met him socially, like in other contexts, and kind of recognized that this is a special human. And so whether I'm getting them, plugged into one of our portfolio companies, or they go on to do their own thing, like I want to stay close to them. And so kind of proactively or consciously invested in that relationship. On the flip side, the investment I made before that, a business called Annam, where we led a larger seed, I'd only known Huiva, the founder, for maybe 4 weeks. I met her when she was, let's call it like testing the waters on the round before she decided she actually wanted to raise. But I've been tracking her for a bit. She was shared with me, or she was mentioned to me by her pre-seed investor as like, hey, this is one to watch, or she's building an interesting space. And as soon as I heard about it and heard about her background, I was like, this is something I deeply care about, or this is a company like I want to, at least spend time with. And the reason I kind of got that look is actually because we had another co-investment in another business. I think the reason this investor, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but more than likely felt comfortable sharing this with me was because of the way I showed up for this other company in their portfolio. And so I think venture over time, I like to think there's definitely an element of luck. There's a huge element of luck, but like a lot of elements of this ecosystem are reasonably meritocratic, which is you earn the right to see good deals because of the way you treat your co-investors, the way you support the ecosystem, and the way, most importantly, you show up for your founders. And so whether a founder is sending you a deal, another investor on their cap table is sending you a deal, like people have memories in terms of how you act, both in good times, but I think more importantly in bad. And so I think that is also a huge part of it.
I wonder, I totally agree with you on like, showing up and then also like meeting them early as well as like just like try to add value early on, then like, so that like it adds to like the good karma that people will like send you more deals. I guess like the other part is like as an investor, what kind of AI tool do you use in terms of like diligencing or like tracking the portfolios or like tracking the companies in the pipeline?
Yeah, we're an ADIO household at Redpoint. And so we use ADIO to track kind of anything and everything. I think what's awesome about ADIO is you can build in a lot of automations. And so we have, all sorts of lists that are pulling this, pulling that. And so ADIO has been a total game changer for us. In terms of doing the research though, like ChatGPT and Manus have totally transformed my life when it comes to getting up to speed on an industry or a company, what have you. I think, previously you would go into a pitch meeting and like oftentimes you were kind of going in cold, which isn't great with hey, I've looked at your website and I looked at the founder's LinkedIn, but like if you didn't share a deck, I only know so much about what you do, where I think what I would much rather do is come in with like maybe not a high school understanding, but like a fourth grade understanding of the business so that we can actually dive into the topics that matter even in our first meeting. And so I think using a lot of the powerful AI tools to, do deep research ahead of time and like come in with at least a slightly prepared mind, for me has been a total game changer and like makes the job a lot more fun.
Using maybe like, I guess like the healthcare industry as an example, like what would you put into deep research before you go? Like, is that just like hey, give me everything about how this industry works, and then it spit up like 4 questions and ask you, and my answer is always yes, like for all of them. But is there like something specific that you would like actually ask to get the information?
No, I think it's so industry specific, though I will say specificity is your friend. And so I actually think a decent amount about the prompts that I'm putting in because I know it like guides a witness in good ways and bad. And so, yeah, I think it's really just like spending time on the prompt, which is a pretty lame answer, but it's true.
What is like a question that you would always ask as a founder that's like maybe most people won't ask or like won't even think of?
I don't know if they're questions that most people don't think of, but I always ask founders, like, out of any problem in the world, like, why are you solving this one? Because I think a LinkedIn tells you one thing, but it doesn't tell you the why behind their decisions. And like, that's much more interesting to me because I really want to understand how they think. So I always ask that. And then a lot of times we get so focused on the product, which is amazing. And like, we love product demos, but that's the product today. And what I'm really interested in is like, in choosing this wedge, why did you choose, like, why did you choose this wedge? But also, like, what sequential doors does it unlock? Like, you look at, let's take a doctor's office, and there is a biller over here and a schedule over here. And like a lot of these people don't necessarily talk to one another. If you think about project expansion, it's much easier to go to go very, you do 2 jobs, so I'm going to take over both of your jobs. Or like you sit next to this person, so then I'm going to take over their job. And so it's how thoughtful is the founder, or like how have they thought about sequencing? Because, ultimately the thing we at Redpoint care second most about is like how epic is this, how amazing is the founder. But the number 2 is like really how big can this be? And that is like, at what point do the number of doors stop being able to be opened? And so we want to understand that like long tail potential. So I really spend a lot of time unpacking that.
I love that. I feel like I'm just like literally taking notes, like why, asking the why instead of like what you did from your resume. And I wonder, maybe, I guess like one of the articles that you recently wrote was like AI cutting down the middleman.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to like maybe share a little bit more about like, how did you kind of like come up with the concept to, how you were thinking about like what kind of opportunities kind of like coming from that research or like that kind of like thought processes.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of I write blog posts very spontaneously, and that sometimes I write them, twice a month. Sometimes I won't write one for 6 months. It's just like as things come to my head. I think with this one, it was something that I just really get out of my head, because as I started seeing companies across a really wide range of industries, like to me, it's just a clear dot that was connecting. And so it's like, as I obsess over something enough, if I like am incapable of ignoring it, then I will write. Then I'll write a blog post on it. And so that's what kind of led to this post. Again, some of this talks about, like the operating systems. I would say, and as I think about these operating systems, they are effectively like these orchestration systems. This is maybe one step before I got to be like, okay, but there are different forms of orchestration. Is it, high degree of customizability, or is it selling the work? And so I think it's funny. I like write, when I write blog posts, it's like a point in time observation or point in time belief. And so others are then reading them just as like this one piece. But I think it's funny, and I should be better about doing this, to actually read the blog post almost as like chapters in a book, because I think in many ways they also show like an evolution in thinking, or like going deeper and deeper. And so anyways, I didn't at all answer your question, but that's a little bit of how I think about it.
I love that. I feel like it's always, I like when you say about like chapter of your books, because these are like kind of like the thought chapters. I think like what you think were like very true maybe like a few months ago, maybe when you reevaluate a few months later, it's like a different kind of picture. So I wonder, since like, you have invested like all these like different subsector of companies, like what, like how do you compare them to each other? Is there like any common thread that you're seeing in both, from like healthcare to construction to these like different other subcategory of things when it comes to investing in
AI? The short answer is not really. Like I think unlike horizontal SaaS, where things are kind of similar and rhyme, in vertical SaaS, a lot of these industries are wildly different. Like healthcare is so different than construction. Now, healthcare, I actually think, can rhyme with law in ways that maybe other people wouldn't think of, or like the legal industry rhymes a lot with the accounting industry. And so you will see some parallels between certain industries, but I don't think you can put like a universal definition or description kind of like uniformly across these disparate verticals.
I wonder, maybe like, since like you have also lived in New York before, I guess like when it comes to like mindset of like the things that like you've seen back in time in New York compared to SF, like what do you think like what do you think set SF apart? Like, obviously people always say, oh, SF came back, or some really huge things about like why AI is like changing the landscape of SF. Like, what are something that you feel like it kind of like hold true in like different geographic location when it comes to founders, and what are something that you felt like made SF like more like important like in the AI kind of like the state of AI basically?
Yeah. I mean, I think it ultimately comes down to the academic institutions that are in the Bay. And like, as someone that has invested in more New York-based companies than San Francisco-based companies, like including, by the way, like some of my favorite AI applications, like Trunk Tools as an example, or Anim as an example, they've chosen New York as their home. But yeah, to your point, like there's a lot happening in the Bay, and I think it comes down to, if you are dropping out of Stanford as a freshman, are you going to drive 30 minutes up the road to San Francisco? Or are you going to try to navigate like the chaos that is New York City? And so I think we're seeing a lot of people who either already were here and are returning, or who are dropping out of these schools, or, you know, spinning out of these research labs and coming here. And I think coming back to, you know, probably the first comment I made, with respect to, you are the 5 people you surround yourselves with. I think a lot of people are realizing that, hey, if I'm building something hyper technical, or hey, if I want access to this talent, like today is where these people are. And so I think that's why you're really seeing like this hotbed of activity, not even just really in the Bay, but like in San Francisco, which, yeah, as someone that lives in the city, I'm very, very grateful for.
I wonder when it comes to deal sourcing, like since like, you know, 3 out of the 5 company on the website is like based in New York,
Yeah.
from your portfolios, like I guess like is there any specific like sourcing strategy like that's like compared to the Bay Area that's significantly different? Or like do you feel like the best company that you kind of like poach them versus like do they kind of like seek you out from, you know, whether it's like asking for a warm intro to or from like your existing network?
Yeah. No, I think that is probably the hardest part of this job, is that every company in my portfolio, I think, has come from a different source. And so it's this job where you like have your head on the swivel, and you're always, you know, you're always on the hunt, and you always need to be open-minded. But I think it really comes down to like, am I creating the opportunities for these like spontaneous introductions to happen, whether it's going to the event, or investing in this relationship, or like showing up for a portfolio company. But no, there's no, you know, easy approach or like one shot approach to sourcing those companies.
I love that. I feel like life is like a it's kind of like a numbers game, or like just like with like a lot of randomness. You never really know which relationship will eventually lead to the unicorn path. Not that like all relationships are about to be unicorn, but okay. So I want to be mindful of the time. Let's do like a quick 30-second fire on. What's your favorite book?
Essentialism.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
A guy by the name of Michael Shaftel, who was one of the more senior managers on the first trading floor I worked on.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
I just read the Gwyneth Paltrow biography, so I'd probably invite Gwyneth, and she would probably bring the best food.
Where can we find you outside of work?
At the golf course, at the yoga studio, or in Noe Valley, which is the best.
Amazing. Well, Meera, thank you so much for coming to the show today. It was such a wonderful conversation.
Thanks so much for having me, Grace. I really appreciate it.
Let me quickly end